I believe that we are ready.
That's legendary. Every time I see it, I'm like,
Okay, we're going to call this meeting to order, folks in the audience. No. All right, welcome. Happy Tuesday. We are going to call to order our special board meeting, our boundary study session. We will start with roll call. And Trustee Constant.
I am here.
And Trustee Coleman is absent as of right now. Trustee Hall is here. Trustee Graham is here. And Trustee Schutz.
Here. Hi.
And we will move on to the Pledge of Allegiance. All right. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, so our only agenda item for this study session is item 2.1, our boundary discussion, which is going to be kicked off by Joe.
Yes, thank you. So I've got a little bit of a presentation to kind of set the stage. I've got two people who are going to come and share some input as well, but my goal is to go over this information fairly quickly, maybe 10-15 minutes, and then we can open it up for the board to talk amongst ourselves, ask questions, and hopefully have plenty of time to discuss next steps. So with that, I'm going to jump right in with my information. First, I wanted to align us to put our board expectations up there as with everything that's kind of like front on our minds. So I won't read them to the board, but I just thought it was important to put that at the forefront of our discussion today. After that, I wanted to put up our most recently approved attendance boundaries. These are effective 2026-27. So for the upcoming 2025-26 school year, it's still the old attendance boundaries. But these are our new approved attendance boundaries that will be effective the following year. So I put that in here. I've also got some maps that I will, once I get through the presentation, I'm going to pass out some additional handouts that maybe help. So first off, I wanted to talk about the last time we talked about attendance boundaries in the form of a committee and going through a process to change those boundaries. That was in 2006. So it was before my time at the district. So this is would be new to me and to all of us in cabinet going through that process. But I did send out to the board the detailed packet that was done in 2006. Just some highlights. It was a pretty large committee. We had a number of people from the community, as well as from partner districts, teachers, staff members. It was a pretty time-consuming process we went through back in 2006. Multiple meetings, and then you saw that report I sent out, and I've got another copy here, a bound copy, and I can pass this around if anybody wants to look through it again. But it was a pretty detailed report, and it went through multiple scenarios, multiple options that eventually came back to the board. But what I wanted to do now is I invited two people who were a part of that committee who were actually still employees of the district. And I talked to each of them for 3 minutes, and I didn't coach them up or tell them anything. I just said, the board and I would love to hear, it was about 20 years ago, but just your feedback, pros, cons, about the process you went through, just anything they would like to share. So I've got Rob Hasty and Brandon Del Orto, who are both part of that committee. So just want to invite whoever wants to come first just to give your thoughts.
Well, now I totally feel old. One of the only few people that remembers this. So, yes, Brandon and I were both part of the committee. Some things that kind of stuck with me. I thought the process overall, I think Joe hit it on the head. It was a very long process, but it was very detailed. I think that the detail that was put into it is something that it should be on the forefront of our mind. Because we don't want to miss anything. I think no matter what you end up doing, I think there will be Monday morning quarterbacking no matter what decision the board ends up making. You guys can look at every possible detail, turn over every rock, and at some point somebody will find a reason why that wasn't enough. But I think when we can say we exhausted every possible effort, I think that we stand in a pretty good place. So some things that I recall from the committee and just some takeaways for me were just that at the time what we were looking at was Antelope High School. And what we were doing was bringing on Antelope High School and looking at the impact to Roseville, Wood Creek, and Oakmont as Antelope came on. Remembering at the time that what we really focused on was trying to make sure that we have community high schools that are roughly in the 1,800 to 2,000 range of what we were really shooting for. And some of the things that were forefront on our mind was the population and how low did a population go at a high school. Sometimes when we think about it, it's not something that we think, oh, well, they're going to still run school and do all those kind of things. There are some implications when you start to get too small. When you start to get down to that 1,200, 1,400 range, you start to find yourself in a situation where teachers are having to teach 3 preps each term. That is demanding on a teacher, and I'll let Brandon speak to that. That can be pretty daunting. In addition to that, it does limit some of the things that you can do on campus because you do have a much more limited staff. As an example, just think about adjunct duties. Adjunct duties for a teacher, where all of a sudden you go from 90 staff members down to 70, you still have the same number of adjunct duties. You still have all the same sports going on. You still have all the dances. You have still all of that. It's just staff is out more. So now they're teaching 3 preps. In addition to that, they're having to do more adjunct duties, so the load on our teachers becomes pretty big. So it's just pieces that you want to be aware of. Some other pieces from a community standpoint is, for me, I really did appreciate the community's involvement. I thought that it was important that we involve parents from the elementary level, from the middle school level, because this does impact them to a certain extent. They've got high school kids that are going to our district, and they've got elementary and middle school kids going to another district. And depending on where we draw those lines, we could be in a situation where we draw a line right in the middle of a middle school, and half those kids now are going to one high school and half are going to another. Not that that is necessarily good or bad, it's just a part of boundary line, readjustment. So something to consider. And then one of the things that I would say that's really important is giving a lot of lead time, giving an opportunity for people to be aware and to process what's going on. When people don't have that time, they feel rushed, they feel like we didn't value their time. And then the last piece I would say is involving teachers was huge. I remember the yelling, the screaming that was going on in the Oakmont cafeteria, and some of it was from teachers and staff who felt devalued, community members who did not feel valued, and so just some pieces to be aware of. Again, I thought the process overall was well done. The last piece that I will say is, and you guys do a great job of this. Number one, you do a great job of involving the community. You do a great job of giving them lead time. And then the last piece is the governance process. Being clear about what our process is going to be, I think will limit a lot of those possible complaints that might come our way. So, anyway, I'm glad to answer any questions, or else you can listen to Brandon, and then we can both answer questions, whatever you want to do.
Any questions?
Yes, I think, when, do I need this thing? Do I need to have that? When you were discussing in your committee, did you ever discuss the transfers, or was it only the boundaries?
It was everything. We talked about all of that. Yeah, because it does. It was an impact.
I didn't see a lot in the packet, but I know that was a high level.
We did because that might have been an alternate route that we took to address some of the concerns that were being addressed by the community members. Okay.
Feels a little different when there's not everybody in here. People recording stuff. First, I apologize for my very cheap faraway glasses and my even cheaper Sam's Club 4-pack for $20 close-up glasses, but it's just too cheap to buy the one that does both, so I kind of get a little confused sometimes. The history teacher that keeps everything. I may not be able to find it, but I know that I have it because I never threw it away, as my wife will attest to. Let's start just with the last question, Marla. The district at the time was very much at that moment not where we are now with transfers. It wasn't as open in any way, shape, or form as it was. Once we're closed, and so it became kind of an emergency pull the necessary break class kind of a thing. But at the time, it wasn't really factored in that there would be clumps of students that were moving from place to place. And I know that looking back at it, it was a learning experience like anything. And so the way I would kind of approach it from, again, sorry and apologize, but everything I do in my life because through a history teacher's perspective, because there was a moment in time where the mini little government that we came up with right after the revolution, the Articles of Confederation, weren't working, and so they came up with this plan of let's revise them, and that became the Constitutional Convention. They were really only supposed to meet for like a week or maybe 2, and they were supposed to propose amendments to the articles, which basically gave the states all the rights. And eventually they sat down, and within 3 days they decided that we need to kind of start from scratch. And so I think that for me, if I was sitting in your place, I'd really try to maybe decide what do I really want to do from the perspective of we start. Because I think there were some fundamental things that, looking back at it, were political in nature, economic in nature, that left us with a situation where, in my experience so far, Oakmont has been on this weird life support as far as population is concerned, because we did make some hard choices back then. That at the time it seemed that Oakmont would be fine for a little bit of time out into the future, but from an RCE perspective, we've always talked about how, again, Oakmont is been just kind of, they're losing people, and we could have drawn lines in such a way that would have kept the whole district kind of moving forward for a little bit longer, but they were harder political choices to make. And Rob mentioned, and there was a handful of times where parents came in and they knew that at the very last meeting, we had hypothetically suggested that we do, can you click back to the actual boundaries thing that you have? There was hypothetical little chunks of time, like where Thomas Jefferson Elementary came in, and the following meeting, the Thomas Jefferson people were going to be sent down to Antelope, and that was just a hypothetical that was brought up at one meeting. And at the next meeting, the people from Thomas Jefferson packed the room with about 10, 15, 20 parents who then came up and said, you're going to destroy my kid, destroy my friends, all that kind of stuff. And so I think we ended up coming up with something that could have been much better, but I think it kind of bowed to some of that energy. And the irony was, what we ended up coming with was shifting kids from way out in the corner down to Oakmont, because those people didn't exist at the time and they weren't there to come and complain. As Pete has mentioned, that back when we actually passed the bonds, there were some of those things that I think, looking back at it, were probably not the most noble decisions that the group made, but they were decisions that worked at the time to keep the most people quiet, the most. And I think those are what are out there. I also think there's going to be a little bit of where, and I'm not trying to tell you to do your job, this is just me having seen this. And Ron was there, we both were teaching at Granite Bay. Ron Severson was our principal at the time. And when we started, we really talked about the idea of trying to create, and I still think this was a great goal, and I would love to see it be at least a thought process of trying to create an internally kind of our own league, our own kind of foothill league of sorts, our own little Placer County league, where more or less the high schools would compete against each other. We didn't really know West Park was coming, but we knew it was going to be somewhere out in the future. But with Antelope and the other 4, we would have, in essence, 5 schools that we could kind of lace each other, Rockland, so people wouldn't be driving down to Davis for athletic competition. That was one of the thought processes. The other thought process, core thing, I will echo what Rob said, the hardest I've ever worked in terms of just pure man hours was the first and second year of opening Wood Creek, and the second year of Granite Bay, because as you said, you're still trying to offer everything. So the kids will have the same experiences they would have in any of our other schools. But if you don't have the student population, then you don't have the teacher ratio to the student population. So I would suggest, as best we can, figure out what you are comfortable with as a proportionality of student populations between the 6 schools, and then project that out. Because we're going to end up probably having another situation where, as we know, West Park is going to just keep growing, that size is going to grow. So what do we do to counter that 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, as opposed to maybe just 1 or 2 years down the road? Because as we know, this thing now is almost 20 years old, this boundary line. So the decisions they made, we've all had to live with, for better or worse, for the last 20 years or so. When it comes to the politics of this, I think you actually came right by, because we were both, it was a long meeting, and at the meeting, we were trying to balance, and we were sitting over the Oakmont, and the big was at the cafeteria, I guess, is where we were holding the meetings at the time period. And the audience would sit in the back, and we had these projections up, although they didn't have these, they had like a different little projection, we had copies of it. And I remember we were talking about numbers, and I asked, well, if we're done trying to contiguous, if we just do that little mighty part that Granite Bay sticks out, like a little sort of thumb, that little nub out there. You remember, this was just a hypothetical. All I asked is how many people live in it if we just went straight up that, kind of right there. And that's why I asked, and somebody said something about the numbers, no problem. I came into Granite Bay the next morning, and Ron Severson ripped me a new one. In essence, he got 3 different calls, 2 from real estate agents who were saying, you've just blown up my phone, Because I've got people saying, what's gonna happen to my housing prices if we're no longer in the Granite Bay district as opposed to the Oakmont district? And it was a hypothetical question. So one of my suggestions would just be to know going in that this is going to be the energy. And I think one way to deflect that from you, even though it's cumbersome, and it was a long process, but I think it did have a lot of eyes on it, is to disengage yourself from as much of this you can and let that committee do kind of your footwork. And then you can direct it through John or Joe, whoever's kind of doing that is kind of the things you want. But the more that you guys, as the elected people, are in this, the more they're going to contact you on all of these issues. And I think it becomes very, very messy very quick that way. Because I think if you really get a committee to do it, led by Joe, led by Rob, or whoever's going to be kind of leading this thing, you can insulate yourself enough to be able to have those hypothetical questions pop up. If I were to do this all over again, I would say there'd be a chunk of the meeting where it would just be the committee. They would talk amongst themselves for a little bit of time, maybe half an hour, and then just like your closed sessions, you open up to the whole and then bring the people in as opposed to, so that people would have the freedom to just think out loud for a little while without feeling like it's going to get a blowback from some pissed off, angry person that says, I cannot believe you just separated my kid from their best friend across the street. So I would suggest having a two-tiered process, even if it adds another half hour to the night. I think it would be well worth it in the long run. And again, I go back to my history. One of the first things those Constitutional Convention guys did is they agreed they're not going to talk about this outside of that room because they knew as soon as they did, people would be hammering them for everything that they felt needed to be done. So my suggestion would be definitely to continue with the committee, have a two-tiered kind of timing system where they open kind of with it just amongst ourselves. Let's just look at the demographics, look at the talk, look at the numbers, see what we think, ask those hard questions, allow that answer to come up without getting into politics first, and then open up to the community and let everybody else be a part of it. If you have community members on the action committee, which I think is a great idea, it's still going to be tough because which parents do you pick? From a parent perspective, having had 3 kids that should have gone to Rosa, because I live way over there on that side, I can actually roll in my bed and almost go gamble up at Thunder Valley. It takes me half an hour to get to work every day. My kids all went to Granite Bay. It took them a while to get to meet new kids. But the idea of having one of the driving things being is to not ever touch a middle school so the kids aren't separated. I think the kids are more resilient than sometimes we give them credit for, but parents of brand new first-time 8th graders are so afraid that the kid is never going to make a friend that they will come crashing down claiming that the worst thing you can ever do is separate kids. I've seen freshmen for years make friends. They'll be fine in the long run. So I would also suggest that we we have to factor these into the decision-making, but holding middle school populations intact at the expense of a more balanced into the future set of lines, I don't think is worth an 8th grader not having their best friend for that first year. They will meet people. If they don't, they'll meet them in college or where they work. So there's a whole bunch of things, and again, I'm free, I'm sure Rob is free. Anytime you have questions along the process, if it is beyond this little presentation, let us know. But there was a lot of stuff to learn from the process, but I think it was, in the long run, it was a good, fairly healthy process. I think it just was allowed to become a little too voice-driven political. And I would try to insulate that part while still letting people have a say. If that makes any sense.
Yes, thank you. Can you, since you're our historian and one of the people that has been
That's
the
code for old.
longest, can you speak a little bit more to what you said in the very beginning? You mentioned like back in 2006, transfers were very few and far between, and I think you said more on an emergency basis. Can you kind of explain maybe what an emergency basis is, and then how that transfer culture has kind of shifted?
So right at the beginning of that time period, we were just opening up IB. We were a couple of years into it. And there was the concern at the district level that people would use IB as a gateway to get into, quote unquote, the good school, Granite Bay at the time. Oakmont was also coming up with this. There's an internal wrestling match even between IB, who should have it, who should not have it, IB or both. And I think the worry was from whoever, I guess Mel, if you're in charge of transfers and things now, is that people would game the system. We hadn't yet had Wood Creek, for example. We have kind of like a magnet school mindset a little bit to some of the schools, like a culinary here and there. So there was really this feeling at the time that kids were going to cherry pick excuses to move. And so the district kind of, from almost 1998 through, just kind of laid a, no, you'll go to your own homeschool, extenuating circumstances that would have to go through a number of hoops, you could be allowed to go internally. We've come a long way since then. But it was a different time, and I think we were really kind of, because the schools were pretty much balanced at a moment in time, right before this. All of them were right around about 18, 19, 2100. They were all pretty close to each other. That makes sense.
Would you just explain again, you said the two-tier process, and I think this is getting down the road a little ways, but are you saying in board meetings, the committee was meeting in front of the public, or tell me,
Yeah,
explain that a little bit
we
more.
would never meet in front of you guys. Rich Strickland would bring our actual committee's kind of talking points, or what we had come up with at that time period, and I have again to keep everything. All the different like scenario, put it down 100%, nobody liked this one. But just in the talking of those hypotheticals, every one of them became political based on anybody who perked their ear up and heard, my kids are now getting theoretically possibly moved to this other place I don't want them to go. And so that would ripple through the community. And this is before texting. I can't even imagine the kind of bombardment you guys are going to get email-wise now in the world. So my thought process would be, whatever the committee is, there's kind of a generic understanding amongst them that we have to have a little moment in time where we can just look at the demographics of the moment. Look at the projected demographics of 5, 10 as best you can. Anybody can figure out what 20 years is going to look like. And have some time to just mentally play with what if, without the fear or worry that this is going to blow back from some angry group of parents or a real estate agent or whomever. That meeting of whoever the committee is would meet and have at least a little time by themselves to just play with the numbers of the demography. And then open it up to any of the community that comes in, kind of like your closed sessions, but they would be just in the same room, but now you open up, people could come in. And they wouldn't be forced into secrecy or anything like that, but they would just have some time to talk. Because I remember after the first couple meetings, a number of us got a little gun shy to even ask questions everyone because of the blowback. So I would try to find a way to insulate a portion of that section. So if we met 6 times, half an hour of the close, kind of just talking about stuff based on like, we'll send something out to democracies, they'll throw a couple of projections out there, we come back, we take a look at it, then we open up and talk out loud with the community as a whole. Not that it's being secret, but it just has to be able to talk. Because you can't think outside the box ever. I don't think we're going to just, the Roseville Joint Union of 20 years in the future, it might not be open up, but some other school is going to, just because of the nature of the way we do the lines, is going to be frankly sitting there going, we have to listen to a history teacher, we have to listen to an English teacher, because the numbers are just kind of locked in. So I think we have a chance to really kind of set a better stage. It's just going to be a little longer, and I think it'll be worth the long run, but it's going to run the risk of some kind of contention at some point.
Okay, thanks. So, but that was at every time the committee met, or that was just at the beginning of the process, the committee would do that, or?
I would imagine setting it up.
I like what you're
first.
saying, I'm just trying to.
I would imagine having it set up, and if the committee decides they don't need it, then they could just waive that and kind of just start the meeting if they needed to.
Okay.
It's almost like your closed sessions, they're scheduled
Yeah.
for half an hour, but sometimes they go 40, 45 minutes, sometimes they don't go as long. I did notice in the lecture how quickly that thing shut down when you started getting pushback from people.
Okay.
And I kept pretty copious notes as to like where we were thinking, what could we do? What about this line? That seems like a natural geographic boundary, but then got shot down so fast and angry that no one touched it again. We just didn't even talk about it. So.
Thank you.
I just want to hear from Joe before I have questions.
Okay.
Good.
I just had a quick question though, about maybe from both of you, kind of just the numbers of the committee. I know you pointed to kind of like the interest of like having representatives from the middle schools, but I mean, just speaking to, was that?
I don't remember exactly how many it was.
Well, there was a lot, I've got them all.
Yeah, they're all on the list.
You've had like a parent, a teacher, administrator from each comprehensive high school, you got a parent from each middle school, you got 2 parent representatives from each elementary. So there's a really long list of people. And I don't know, how was that a roadblock or a challenge to reach some kind of consensus on things by having that many people?
I think what it allowed us to do was see a breadth of opinions and a breadth of viewpoints. And I would agree with Brandon. When we were able to talk and work as a committee, we were usually able to communicate with one another, even if we disagreed, and people would at least see the point, where as soon as it became public, like Grant said, it would just immediately shut down all communication. People would just kind of stop because they realized they were at the end of the very gun. And so I think that's why Grant is advocating some time to talk a little bit in closed session type atmosphere, so that there's that opportunity. Because I felt like we did have good dialogue, and people were able to go, oh yeah, that idea I had, yeah, that's a good point. That's probably not a good idea. Let's think about, we were able to move through pieces even though there were a large number of people as a part of that group.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, back to you.
Yeah, if I could, I'll fly through these last thoughts, ideas, and then we can go further on with the conversation. One thing to keep in mind is, and it was mentioned a couple times before, is demographer. So that's something I would want to get direction on. I decided not to bring a demographer here today, but if the board wants to hire a demographer, what do we want that demographer to do? Do you want me to bring you some choices of demographers? I know we did that with the, when we made the decision about going to at-large to by district area work with a demographer. This is a little bit different, but a similar where a demographer can be useful. We currently have a demographer that we work with who does our enrollment projections each year. And so I have reached out to him just to answer questions and get information. But that's something just I want the board to kind of keep in the back of their mind as we start talking about it today, is what services would we want from a demographer and how would we want to go about that. This we talked about a little bit. This is kind of just as best we can, a recommendation / plea, I guess. We recognize the program in each of the sites, the facilities we have at the sites, as well as our transfer process, all have an impact on our enrollment at each site. But the problem is we can get 1,000 different directions the more we talk about this. So I don't want to ignore this, but I want to, as best we can, try to keep that in your mind, as well as try to keep that separate as best we can when we talk about our boundaries, because it really complicates it quite a bit. So that's just a recommendation, a suggestion, as we talk about our attendance boundaries, to really just our best look at just those attendance boundaries and what makes the most sense. And the one topic that I was hoping to recommend that the board really spend a lot of time on today, and what I think is the board's most important role and the biggest step in this process, is really what is the boundary criteria. We've kind of talked about it before, like what is our goal? What are we trying to accomplish? We talked a little bit about it before with West Park. You know, we've got this overcrowding issue, but the prior board, and if you the prior attendance committee, if you look through that governance process, they did have boundary criteria. What's of high importance, what's of medium importance, what's of small importance. I think no matter what the board chooses as far as committees or anything, having that criteria is going to be really important, so that you know, if you want cabinet to work on it or a large committee, they know what they're shooting for, and ultimately bringing back to the board things that adhere to that criteria. Keeping in mind that we still have 11,000 students projected to go to 14,000, so there's only so many problems we can solve. But one of that last bullet point, and maybe is a topic of conversation today, is you're all 5 different board members, and what's a high priority one may just be a medium priority for another, or a low priority, vice versa. So I think it may be of value to talk about maybe not necessarily the criteria, but how does the board want to come to your consensus of the criteria? Kind of like when you're interviewing for a job, like how do you rank all these different things? And so that is another idea I had that I think could be valuable to discuss today. I did put in some criteria considerations. This was from our demographer who's done this work in other districts across the state of California, just to kind of let you know what some other districts decided to make as their criteria. One at the top I thought sounded interesting because it was balanced enrollment to address shifting population trends. That sounded pretty important. You know, we've had this population growth out in the Northwest, and so that was an interesting one. But you know, I just listed them. There was no rhyme or reason where I put them in there, but those are just ones that other districts have talked about. And this last one I'll mention too is impact as few students as possible. I know we have our existing boundaries that have been here for 20 years, and didn't know if that's an important thing, because if we don't really care about it, we can impact as many students as possible. Well, that opens up a lot of opportunities, but if we're hoping to impact as few students as possible, then that kind of limits what we can do. So And then I just wanted to put this in here, is really to get direction as we move forward. What does success look like for the board? At the end of this, what is the board hoping? Are you hoping to get, to come back after meeting with the committee, here's 5 options we think meet your criteria best, and maybe you send us back, and that's kind of what happened in this last 2006. They brought about 8 scenarios, and actually the board at the time wasn't happy with any of them, and we had to go back, and they came back with another scenario that the board eventually approved. So that would be just a question I would have for the board, is what are you hoping to gain out of this? What are your goals? And I know this is maybe not the most popular question, but is more time needed? We have, and I'm going to pass out our projections and information I've given to you before, but do we need time for enrollment patterns to still settle? We've got a lot of growth. We have the capacity to meet all our needs, especially at the West Park issue for a little while, but we do have an issue that's going to need to be addressed at some point. So that's just another question. And with that, I'm going to actually pass out, and then we'll open it up for conversation. I'm going to give you one big one that is shown like this. I'll bring over to you. I'm going to, maybe someone can bring it. Okay, this other one I'm going to bring is I already shared with you that color-coded, where we talk about those different yellow, orange, red. And then this last one is, this is just Joe's numbers, but it has our existing enrollment in each site currently, as well as a kind of approximate capacity range. So you kind of have that as another document.
Submitting evidence, waiting on the stand.
Bring it back to me and send me copies. I made 10 copies, so if other cabinet members or anybody else wants them.
Thank you.
So with that, that's the, I did promise I would try to keep it short, give most of the time to the board to kind of just direction, questions, comments.
What's that? Thank you, Joe. All right. I really like what you said, Joe, about the board kind of focusing on what are 2 or maybe 3 top priorities are. And I guess I would kind of like to hear what everybody thinks about that. If you were to pick 2 or 3 of these bullet points where he has the boundary change considerations, and just hear our thoughts. Like for me, I think number 1 is the balance enrollment to address shifting population trends. That seems to be the top priority to me. And then also transportation and student safety as my second one. But do you guys have thoughts on that? Do you want to weigh in?
I sort of have some pre-thoughts before I want to share those type of thoughts.
Perfect.
I think there's some, just some bigger issues that I think we should consider. And, as we were told 20 years ago, this decision was made to be where we are now. 20 years is a long time. You can look at it from a number of perspectives, but I think one of the things we have to look at is the decision was made because of enrollment imbalances at the time. And quite frankly, our issues today are significantly bigger than the issues were 20 years ago. I think there's new issues that we're facing that weren't even part of the equation back then. And some of those were mentioned, things like IB, all of our CTE programs which vary from site to site, West Park and the impact of the growth, things like that. I think the need for action is greater. I do recognize, as Joe said, we have to think about timing of all this, but I don't think anyone would say we don't need to do anything. So there's issues, they're big issues. I think we have a lot of things to think about as we prepare to talk about criteria and process, because I think those are 2 distinctly separate subjects. But I think before we even do that, we have to think and talk about what our goals are. Is our goal serving students? Is it serving students and their families? Really kind of talk that through, because we're making decisions potentially over the next, say, 6 months, based on the current situation of, what, 11,000-ish students and their families and the population that exists now. But over the next 20 years, there's going to be multiple cohorts of new students and multiple cohorts of new families that the decision we're making has to serve them just as well as it serves our students now. And I think we have to look at some of the bigger sort of meta issues. If you look back at population changes since 2006, and we don't have year-by-year data, but we can look at the 10-year census data. In 2010, Granite Bay had 20,000 people, and between then and the current population, as reported, it's 22,600. So it's gone up just over 10%, 11%, 11.3% for our math folks. But it's currently trending down. And since the 2020 census, which was just 5 years ago, it's trended down almost 0.85% since the 2020 census. If you look at Antelope, and I'm looking at those because those are clearly definable communities that are tracked separately. We can't really do this for the Dry Creek area because they don't have the numbers for that, or the Morgan Creek area, but we could look at sort of the two bigger areas. Antelope, when we look at the same time, they went from 2010 numbers of about 45.8 thousand to 2010 numbers of 45.8 thousand to 2025 numbers of just over 48,000. So again, just about a 10%-ish raise over that time. But just as importantly, since the 2020 census has been trending down 0.77%. So Granite Bay and Antelope are moving fairly similar. They're correlated in their movement. But then you look at Roseville. And again, you can't really look at Roseville by sections, but you can look at Roseville as a community. You can go back, there's more data available further back, so you can go back to the year 2000, so 6 years before boundaries were changed. There were 80,000 people in Roseville. 2010, 4 years after the boundaries were changed, there were 120,000 people, so a 50% increase. And then currently, 2025, the population is 166,000. So that's another, 32% increase. And if you look at the trend since the 2020 census, Roseville is trending up at over 2% per year. So we have to look at that and consider whatever the demographer says, you're going to get the population growth, but you also have to consider the gentrification that does or does not happen, and the profiles of the people that move into new communities versus people who buy into established communities. So all of that is going to impact us as we go on. So I say that because the one thing I can tell you for sure is the demographer's numbers are not going to be right. We know that because we can look historically. They haven't been right in relation to our enrollment projections. They haven't been right as far as what everybody has projected when they've drawn their political boundaries and their districts and all that stuff. So the only thing we know for certain is the numbers we have are not going to be right. So we have to see what else can we look at. We can look at our map and we can see that our boundaries aren't very logical. As Brandon pointed out, they don't follow, arterial roadways or straight vertical lines. You have Oakmont that's this funny shape with a little C at the end. You have all of these little issues. We have attendance areas that are not compact. You have people who literally drive 40, 45 minutes past other schools to get to their schools. We have a community that has significant traffic problems that they haven't been able to fix. And we have attendance boundaries and commute patterns for our students and their families that compound that rather than ease it. We have 3 feeder districts, but we only have one of the 3 where we follow their feeder boundaries with our boundaries. And There's no real, it's hard to see that we do it for one and not all three, and we have to ask ourselves why. Is that a reasonable thing to do? I do think that, and I'll talk more about criteria in a little bit, the criteria we pick is going to have to be really clear. And I have been through mapping in so many different jurisdictions, whether it be for congressional seats, assembly seats, senate seats, city council, full boundaries, district boundaries, school district boundaries. I served on the LAFCO commission that for 8 years that deals with urban service area boundaries, municipal growth boundaries, and all those different things, and where the lines are for cities that end and don't end in special districts. And there is the times when criteria is not set clearly up front, sets the table for political arguments to happen at the back end. And so I really think the discussions that we have in getting to a consensus on criteria are going to be paramount in order to have the best end result, not only for the community today, but the community over the next probably 20 years. I appreciate Brandon's points about the politics. This is going to be a political discussion. Now, I don't think it should be, but it will be. And I know that for every argument there is to keep us insulated from the politics and have the community do it, there's an equal argument for why we should just take the brunt of it, because that's what we were elected to do. And we can have that philosophical discussion all day, but I think we should be thinking about that. The more people you have involved, you have both more politics, you have more discussion, you have longer time, but you also have a process of catharsis where people at the end, even if they don't get what they were hoping to get, feel like they've been heard, they understand the reasons more. So sometimes going through that pain is worth it for the end result, which is to have a community that's harmonious at the end, whether they like our boundaries or not. But I don't think there's any way we insulate the committee or us from the politics of the decision. It's just, it is what it is. I think we also have to think and look at what we have done in the past and what other school districts have done to honor legacy attendance if you change the boundaries. And there's clear history of that. And there's policies that we can look at from other areas on if we were to make a significant change and it meant that people who have, 50 years of Oakmont graduates, all of a sudden now their youngest kids or their grandkids are going to go to pick one, that we can have a process where we honor legacy families because there is a commitment by families to their schools, and we want that. We want the strength and the spirit and sense of community in our schools. And I know, like, my youngest daughter could have went to West Park, but she chose she wanted to go to Oakmont because that's where everyone in the family had gone. She felt like a Viking, wanted to be a Viking. And there's ways that we can deal with that. So I want us to always remember that for every negative output, we have the power to create a system where we can address those issues if we so choose, and I personally think that we should. I think that we have to be conscious of the fact that most of the problems we have are because of board decisions or indecisions. Quite frankly, these boundaries should have been dealt with quite a few years ago, but because of the politics, boards have chosen not to do it, and that would be our easy answer. And say, you know what, it's a hot potato, let's not do this, let's let the next group of people do it. But again, we have to talk about who are we serving and why do we serve and what's in the best interest of the students or the families. And another decision that we made as a district was to offer distinctly different programs at each of our comprehensive high schools. And we've created this environment that is essentially a magnet school environment without a magnet school process for people to choose where they're going. And I think it's great that we offer this diverse education to students that can do literally almost anything they want to do. We can prepare them for it, but we also know it's not feasible to do that at every campus. And when we make those decisions, we have to understand that those impact these type of things. And so we have to put lines on a map to keep people in community-based schools. And the whole reason for having attendance boundaries is historically to keep communities together in school. But then we created a system where we encourage people to leave their community schools. So I'm not saying it's right or wrong, it's just something that we have to deal with, whether it be IB, CTE, AP, dual enrollment, whatever the case may be, we have all these things that we have to sort of balance. And I just want to stress again, we have to make sure that as we balance the needs and wants of the current students in the community, we have to balance that with the needs and concerns of future community, many of the students who haven't even been born yet. And I just I'm going to be reminding of us that quite often, because I know it's just, the easy thing is to listen to the 1,100 kids we have today, and we have to listen to them, but we have to listen to them within the context of everything else. So I say all that to come up with, I do think if it were up to me, we would first talk about criteria without even discussing process at all. Let's set expectations of what we want to achieve, what's our goals, what criteria do we want to use to do that, and then, in my opinion, only then should we then discuss about the process to get there. And I think if we do it in other ways, we tend to get the cart before the horse, and it makes it harder for us to make a decision. So I know that was long-winded, but these are areas I feel passionate about. It's weird to love maps, but it's one of the things that I love to look at and draw. But when we're dealing with maps, they have a lot of impacts. So I just want us all to be conscious of that. So thanks for indulging me.
I just want to make sure that I got your point. So you're saying all that boils down to, you want to make sure, maybe your idea would be today or the next couple meetings, I don't know, that we set criteria and goals.
I think goals come first. What do we want to achieve by doing the maps? Why are we doing it? What's the goal? Then 2, the criteria that's going to help us get to that goal. And then 3, what's the process we're going to use to implement that criteria to achieve our goal?
Okay.
So I just had one thing to add on to that, Heidi. And it's kind of what I was thinking along the same lines, Pete. You know, I mean, definitely Joe's recommending we establish criteria first, but I think you're calling goals when I'm thinking of interests. What are our interests? And definitely our interests now are different than they were in 2005. You know, they're different, dealing with recession, population decline, a new school coming. West Park wasn't even twinkling of an eye, you know, really, I don't think at that point. And now we're here really driven by a key interest was around overpopulation in one of our high schools, and then how to deal with that beyond the fixes that we've done temporarily to stop the bleeding a little bit, right? So I think it's you know, thinking about kind of what those key interests are that we have, and that'll help drive what those criteria are. And you're calling goals, I'm calling interests, but I think it's really the same thing.
Agreed.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure we're solving the right problem. I know I've said this before. We're assuming we have a boundary problem. And the reason why I'm saying that is we have a so I don't want to go through all the work of changing boundaries and then discovering that, okay, we allow all these transfers and now we're just going to jumble it back up again, and now we have enrollment issues at schools again. So before we just go down that path of we need to work on boundaries, I'd like to take a step back and make sure that that will solve whatever problem we think we're trying to solve. Because Joe, and forgive me, I should have sent you a note asking for this. Because again, okay, you gave us numbers of what total enrollments were, including transfers. But are those the numbers we work off to redraw boundaries, or do we actually look at the residential numbers? Because that's what we should do if we're redoing boundaries. And for me, no one else, I have something that you probably gave us months ago, could be totally not current anymore, but, and I know I made this point before, if you look at just the residential numbers, it looks like Wood Creek and Granite Bay needs more footprint. Forget West Park for a second. West Park's a different animal that we do need to address. But when you look at the numbers from after all the transfers, well, now we're trying to increase the footprint for Roseville and Oakmont. And so which numbers are we working off of? And so before we start this path down, what kind of criteria do we want to give the committees? Like, what problem are we solving? And what's our problem with enrollment? And how do we go about solving that problem? If we have a problem with enrollment, do you follow what I'm saying? So I don't want to assume it's boundaries. And maybe it's a little bit of boundaries, and I know Joe asked not to talk about transfers and not have that be a distraction, but I feel like that is a huge part of this. Going to your point, we have magnet schools. We have schools that are so different in culture and as well as offerings. We did that on purpose. And okay, now here's one of those things where I'm just going to say stuff. And it doesn't mean I support it, but okay, maybe we don't have any boundaries, and now it's just everyone just applies to what school they want, and now it's a lottery because we have these unique schools. Or I had one principal mention to me, maybe you have some districts where you can pick 2 schools because those are the closest, and you can pick either one, and that's your choice. I mean, I almost wonder if there's other things anyway, I won't go on, but we could come up with all kinds of stuff like that.
I think they're all good points, and I brought up the whole thing about maybe we should consider that a way to solve it is to not have boundaries and to take a true magnet approach. I do think, though, we've had the discussion and we've closed most transfers, and we have got those numbers and we've discussed it. So but
I don't think we don't close to prevent the drain on the school. No. So we have a responsibility to the community to make sure, okay, if someone is driving for Oakmont, and I'm just going to speak to Oakmont right now because that's where the challenge is in the moment. And let's say you have a family that's happy to go to Oakmont, their kids can walk, and then we allow, I'm just going to say unlimited transfers just because no one else is here. And then we allow unlimited transfers, and suddenly this robust school that had all the offerings, now they're cutting, and now we are hurting those community members that were putting faith in us to make sure that we were maintaining Oakmont. So I almost wonder if we need to be setting some minimums of how much we'll let out. Okay, now you've got lotteries. I mean, I know I'm throwing all kinds of stuff, but I think that's what we have to do to make sure that we have a boundary, because I don't want to go down the boundary track and then discover we didn't have a boundary problem, we had a transfer problem. That's all.
I agree, and I actually think we have both. And we've partially addressed one and we've partially addressed the other, but we haven't fully addressed both. I think, Joe, the demographer would only use population data, not any transfer data, is that correct?
Yeah, correct. The demographer is just going to look at the resident students. They can look at the number we currently have enrolled there, but they're not going to, they typically don't predict transfers.
And Brandon alluded to it, or Brandon and Rob in their conversation. What ended up happening is when they made this decision, especially the Crocker Ranch area, that's when all the transfers started. That's how they appeased that community who were losers in the game. They let them all go to Wood Creek. And then when I came in a year later for Antelope, it was let's get as many kids as we can from other school communities. And then that's what really started it. Then when the recession hit, it was everybody was fighting for kids. So it was always get more, get more, get more. Then the culture is, and we see it now, school choice. And that's part of it. Most of our schools are actually the same. I mean, most districts don't have 2 IBs, so that's one issue, especially right next to each other. But the reality is most transfers are athletics and performing arts. That's the bulk of them. And then when you look at the randomness of our boundaries, you know, you've got baseline Oakmont going all the way to Dry Creek coming to Oakmont, or it used to be West Park. You look at all the crazy Roseville boundaries all the way across 65. Thomas Jefferson is barely even a quarter full now as an elementary school, because that entire area 65 all goes to Rockland schools starting in kindergarten. So we lose those kids before we ever got them. So the transfer thing is real in that it's a culture now and only growing. And when we say no to transfers, as Mel can say, now we have attorneys lining up saying, my kid's going to get in for other reasons, fraudulent documents. So poor West Park now is probably 100 families who were told you can't transfer, all finding addresses or faking documents to get in. So we're going to deal with that no matter what we do on that. And I will say Mel and her team, and although we're still in the initial phases of it, but this year, bless her heart, is said no to a lot of people. We've said no more this year, probably in the last 20 years. And every one of those is multiple appeals and 35 emails and now attorneys trying to play that game. So it's gonna be there. I do think it's a part of the enrollment issue, but I think our boundaries also create the need to transfer. And it's like I said, neighborhoods like Crocker Ranch, you can go to a kindergarten birthday party right now, and they're already talking about what high school they're gonna go to. As my wife hears that as a kindergarten teacher, and teachers talk about it in our feeder districts. They already know what high school they're going to when they start kindergarten. And it's rarely the school of the area they live in. And so that's the challenge we have when this is all said and done. But I think the boundaries lead to the transfers. And then we can get to that, but we're going to be simultaneously dealing with transfers anyways, with closed boundaries. We've had conversations about, Marla, what you said about the departure numbers. Elk Grove has done that in the past, putting caps on departures and lotteries. So we have explored that as well. We'll continue to explore that regardless of this outcome. If we stayed status quo, we're still going down that road anyways to try to minimize that as much as we can.
And if I could add one more thing, I think we can also learn from what other places have done poorly. And I like to pick on the city of Roseville, so I will. Their routes got so bad that when they had their districting commission work, they explicitly had to start with not a line on the map and had to start with a blank map so that they wouldn't be influenced by all bad decisions that they had made over quite a while. And so we want to also make sure that we don't set up that type of situation in the future or have the discussion, do we want to embrace that kind of conversation this time? Is a blank map a good or a bad thing to do? I think it's both. But you know, how we're going to get there, we need to be thinking about all those things.
Hey, Pete, are you talking in voting districts or electoral districts? Yeah. Definitely different animal, you know, I'd say, right? We're dealing with, I know that comes into play as far as community interest, but yeah, definitely, I think a blank map would be disastrous. But anyways, different animal for sure.
Oh, go ahead.
I gotta, so I'm gonna leave here in a second. Not that this is it, but I would add to Joe.
Come to the mic.
Yeah, sorry. I would, having gone through this no matter what it is, and I've seen this happen at Wood Creek a couple of times, where whatever the actual criteria is, they're usually the criteria set on a kind of a descending scale of priorities that are positives. I think it's as imperative if you want to be completely transparent and not have it come back and bite you later on, because I think if you're up front, the non-negotiables, the things that, for whatever reason, for the five of you, these are things we will not overrate, because if the group goes off without knowing what those landmines are for the future, it's almost as bad as having a really clear set of positives. And that's kind of what happened with our last time, is we came up with a couple of things, came to the board with it, and didn't know that there were some things that the board had decided already before we even started, they weren't going to allow to happen. And as much as we can be clear on not just the positives that could be gained from this, but also we will not touch this third rail of that one, whatever those are. I think that's going to be important because I have seen this happen. John came into the district when this was kind of blown up. Our own principal, Whitfield, was a great woman, but she would lead us to believe that we were all collectively making a decision that she had already decided on, and we would meet for months on something, only to have it not then be fulfilled later and not know why. But it was out there, and so I think as much as we can be clear on, even the bad things, that we're just not going to deal with this one for whatever those are. I think that would be as important as the positives that we're trying to get out of this too. So.
Yeah. And just to kind of jump on what Brandon said there, it popped in my head, and I wanted to say this earlier, is as we create our goals or our criteria or process, probably the most important thing is school comparisons. Because that's what's going to happen. That school, those kids. So when this happened with Antelope, can you imagine Thomas Jefferson community on 65, brand new community, and they were going to go to school with those kids in Sacramento. And I say that because that's all I heard my first year in this district when they described Antelope High School, those kids. Even when they were at Oakmont, they were defined as those kids. And so part of this process for us is we have to make sure every school's great, every program's great. And that's the stance that to me is so important in this process, because that's going to be the politics. You're making my kid go to a lesser than place. And that's where the politics, that's where the energy comes from. And that's, and Mel knows it just from transfers, and Brad lived it, I lived it. That's where it all is. It's the comparison. It's a lesser than situation, and that is so important for us, cabinet, Brandon, teachers, everybody, Mark and the administrators, is we have 6 amazing comprehensive high schools that are very unique. And I think one of you said it already, unique cultures, unique programs. They all have their strengths and programs. And how we validate that and promote that through this process is probably equally, if not more important than whatever boundaries actually get defined in the end. Is we are making sure that everyone knows we have 6 outstanding schools and programs. And to me, that's so important as we go through this, because that'll be the political pushback, is we're doing something to somebody and they'll try to trap us into that conversation, that you're forcing my kid to somewhere. It's like, no, I'm forcing your kid to a great school. You know, have you ever met Mark? and Mark's here, so I'm going to just give Mark credit. Mark does that daily with families. He'll drive to a house, he'll go over to the middle school, the elementary school, a coffee shop. Let's talk about Oakmont High School. What do you think you know about Oakmont High School? And then Mark has a conversation with them. And even if they do decide to transfer, they're transferring with facts, not stories and rumors and misinformation. So Mark does that all the time. As we're talking about this, Mark's living it right now in real time, and I appreciate Mark for doing that. That's why he's here today, because that's how much he believes in this process and what it could do for Oakmont.
Well, back to my original thought, I think it would be helpful to decide on the goals, like what are everyone's top priorities. I mean, there is a part of me, Pete, that I'm not suggesting that this is a good idea, but I would be very curious to see if we were to give a demographer a blank map, what would that look like? Not that we would use that at all, but it would be interesting to compare, like what geographically makes the most sense, regardless of any political or economical or anything. Just if this is the capacity at each school, because I do think that one of the bullet points on there that Joe wrote, which was, where are your bullet points? Something about boundaries that assign students to their closest schools. I don't think that's possible. I mean, and I would want to see that, but I don't think it's possible to create a map where every single student gets to go to the school that is physically closest to them. And if we had at least data to explain that to parents, because going back to what Mel said, like that is the reason for a lot of the transfers, is they want to be at the school that's closest to them. But if we could create a map that is closest to that as possible without upending everything, and maybe that's not possible, but at least we could take the map that we have, compare it to, like, what would make the most geographical sense, where we would get the most kids possible closest to their school, just to see what it looks like. And it might be a complete fiasco, we throw it away, but I don't know, it'd be an interesting starting off point.
Agreed.
I'll just share a couple of thoughts that I've written down. And I don't know if they'll totally flow, I'm just gonna throw them out there as part of the conversation. It seems to, part of me, what I'm thinking is the main goal is to determine long-term community-based school boundaries. For me, it would be, let's make something that's going to be as long-lasting as we possibly can. And probably 20 years from now, they're probably gonna have to redo it. That's just the nature of it, and that's okay, but that's the overall, I would think, well, for me, that's what I'm brainstorming, that's the overall goal. I think community-based schools are incredibly important, and that's one of our board expectations, is that we engage in partnership with families in the community. So I think, for me, the smaller goals underneath the big goal is to have community-based schools. I feel that, I'm just throwing this out there, and this is, I know, getting a little maybe further down into the weeds, but the idea of magnet schools and transfers, I don't think that would be a good idea at all, because you have people who have resources to make those transfers and people who don't. And so then you end up with a school, then you end up not every school being good. We end up with schools that are segregated naturally, economically, by people who have means and don't have means for those transfers. But if we have these community-based schools, and then we have to commit as a board to financially support each one of those schools in terms of making sure they have the facilities to serve their students, good facilities like West Park, then I think, and then the programs come in, if we say we all have the same number of kids, then they're not losing those programs. Another goal for me is just the best use of the facilities that we already have. I want to make sure that we use those facilities well. So that's just kind of throwing out some of the main ideas that I've had in my head, and we'll see if those fit in anywhere. One other question I wrote down, will this affect our trustee areas, or would we need to redo our trustee areas? Because I know the trustee areas were done specifically so each trustee would cover 3 high schools.
No,
So-
not every trustee has 3.
Okay.
Yeah, I only have 2.
Okay.
You only.
And that was,
Be a
sorry,
non-trustee area.
it would, and not just a community interest that may have been considered as part of that redistricting, but it's based on different criteria. And we don't, yeah, you're right, there's no uniformity that we all have one high school or something.
Okay.
And that's not what the law requires.
Yeah, just for some historical reference, the board at that time felt that since we had 6 schools and 5 districts, we wanted to avoid having this idea that this board member represents this school, this board member does this school. So we stated an intent to try and have as many attendance areas as possible within each trustee area, but it was sort of one of the last criteria. And the redrawing of those maps is every 10 years it's mandated, and it's after the 10-year census, when the census numbers, so we'll do a census in 30, the numbers will come out in 31 if they're on time, and then we'll make trustee area changes in time for the 22 elections. Or 32, sorry, 32 elections. And that's triggered automatically by state law, where we literally could change school boundaries today and change them in 6 months. Change
Okay.
them. Never, you know,
Okay, good.
completely separate.
That was the right answer. Thank you.
Yeah, we kind of get forced to do it every 10 years, and especially with the growth out in Northwest Roseville with the sizes, so we'll be forced to make at least some changes in early 2030s being said.
Okay. Another question, if if we just said, okay, Wood Creek, Roseville, Antelope, those are hitting the red zone. We've got a new building coming at West Park, and then we've got Roseville, like I said, and Wood Creek and Antelope hitting. What if we just put portables on those campuses? Would that solve any problems rather than redoing all the boundaries if we just upped capacity at those schools?
Yeah, it depends on the site, but yes, some sites have the capability of additional portables or classroom buildings, and that could alleviate. We've explored it at Antelope. We feel pretty good now, but we have space where we could add a couple portables. So that's kind of always an option. Some sites have a little more options than others.
One of the reasons I brought up the population trends, and I meant to say this, but I didn't read the note as I was going down my list, is one of the things we need to be conscious of is that the city of Roseville projects hitting a population of 240,000 by, I can't remember the year, 2038, 2040, something like that, which is another 30% growth for them. And virtually all of that is going to be in what we now see as the West Park attendance area. And if you drive out there, you will see that every year those numbers are going to eclipse what our projections are, because the building, all of that Placer 1 development is within our district. And then you have all the stuff going on in the Amorosa Ranch area. You've got the Winding Creek 2 area. You've got the area by the new, not just the Sac State University, but there's another university being built further west, and that's right up on the city limits, or the boundaries, so you're going to have more population to there. And so there's a bigger problem for the next generation of board members of why don't we have another school planned out there? And quite frankly, that should be something we should be talking about too, is what are we going to do when Roseville hits the 250,000 population and all of those people are within our boundaries? That's a big deal. I mean, the city school district's planning to build a middle school out there. They've got a bunch of elementary schools out there, and we don't have anything. It'd be crazy, but we could eventually see the West Park boundary be west of West Park and not even be in its own boundaries because of the growth that we see.
There is a new high school that's coming out, but it'll be in the Center School District, way out towards Watts / Santucci, like way out there. But it'll be not our school district.
Well, so is there, I had sent this question to John Joe several weeks ago, is there a world in which building a new school, is that something to consider now? It seems massively financially not doable right now, but should we be having that conversation right now for any reason?
Yeah, we need to see what the city of Roseville, when they're annexing. I think it's likely going to be something, I just don't know how much further into the future. As they annex further out west, as soon as the city of Roseville talks to me, I'm like, so where are you setting aside 50 acres approximately for a new high school? I think we're still quite a bit away. It's probably 10 years away from that, being here. But if they continue to annex additional out west, then that will be.
So that would be an answer to our problems that we're seeing now, is what you're saying?
Potentially, yes. So is it, like for instance, you see that blue line at the very top? When you go out west, there's no housing out there. That's still part of our boundary. So if the city annexed further west, then hopefully we would be able to, we'd still have to figure out funding and a lot of things to be resolved there. But in theory, that would be potentially a 7th high school. And that would be a whole nother, what do we do with our boundaries? How do we rebalance?
Keep in mind, our demographer probably will not include all that because there's no specific plans, general plans yet for that. So the numbers that we're going to be balancing won't include that growth, but that growth is coming.
Do the numbers that we're projecting in 2032, 2033, 13,961 students, do we have, if we were to just, I need to do the math, but can we what if we just evenly divided those up between our 6 schools? Do we have capacity in those 6 schools for 13,961 students? Who can do the math? Who's an accountant in this room and really good at that?
We're definitely tight. As you can see, just with, when we look at the numbers straight across, we're red at Roseville, West Park, Wood Creek. So assuming those numbers are 100% accurate, which is Pete said, we know they are.
So I guess my question is redoing the boundaries going to help us? If we don't have the capacity, no matter what?
Yeah, that's part of the problem. We're going from 11,000 to 14,000, and aside from another high school, if these numbers are all true, yeah, there's no perfect answer. We're going to have problems. Yeah.
But right now, we have schools in the red, schools in the orange, schools in the yellow, and schools with no warning. And in a perfect world, they would all be in the same steps. So, you know, if we looked at this, I'm looking at this spreadsheet for the rest of you guys, the ones with the colors. If we looked at what the optimum numbers would be to create those all orange, and I'm not sure where the breaking point of orange from 1944 to 2015 at Roseville and each of those are, but if we were to find that breaking point of what, I think that could be informative. What number would put each school just under the tipping point of orange? You know, and because I'd rather not have any schools in red. If we can do it, I don't think we might have that option. But having one school with no warning, one with just a yellow light, and then the most of ours being red lights, that's where the concern is for me.
And do these projections include the inter-district transfers from outside of our district?
These projections assume we have the same number of transfers.
Okay, but which is like the 1,000, so we're 1,000 though, right?
Yeah.
So really, 1,000 of these students are transfers in.
Correct. It's lowering, especially this year with Antelope being closed to transfers, so that's lowering it quite a bit. We also have inter-districts out, so yeah, we're roughly about 1,000, a little less than 1,000 net. Yeah, so and that's 4 years with the kids. So every year, I think Mel just said 122
Net.
is our net right now for next year.
And I would say that's almost entirely, well, before this year, it's Antelope, Oakmont, and Granite Bay.
Yeah, those are the
So that's 1/10 of 1% of student population, right?
Yeah, for just that one grade, yeah. So we would have more that are currently sophomores, juniors, seniors, but as of just going from current year to next year, we're projecting 122. Or 120, whatever I said.
Just walking back, one other question. If we just put portables on the places that can, on the campuses that can have portables, and if there was room at Wood Creek to build a new classroom building, would just increasing the facilities solve our capacity problem, or do we have to do the boundary changes no matter what?
I think that's a potential, it could help. One of the concerns, particularly like at West Park and some of the sites, is we enter into other issues like parking and stuff like that. We're seeing that right now at West Park. We've got issues, cafeterias, you know, the lockers, things like that. So, but that can definitely alleviate some of the problems and potentially delay or help with that.
I think we also have to consider that one of the driving things that sets us to red is not just capacity, but physical capacity, but management capacity as well. And you know, if you talk to Becky about the challenges of managing that number of students when we get in the 3,000 range, it's a big challenge for management. I don't want to use the control word, but you know, how do you control a group of students that's that large?
Well, also I think students lose the opportunity to participate in as many sports. You know, again, it's far more competitive for some of the the activities that are capped naturally.
Yeah, you can only have so many at basketball
Right,
games, so
right.
yeah.
Right.
And I would just add, I think, especially when we look at those numbers that are in the red, I think Wood Creek is, they've been at about 2250 before. So, yeah, a couple portables, that seems doable. I think West Park at 3,500, much bigger of a challenge, and portables don't really solve that as much. I would also say that Roseville going to that 2,000, that would be really, really difficult at Roseville, just with the design of that campus and the number of parking spaces. And so I think kind of what you said, Tiffany, Wood Creek seems more doable, but some other sites would be a challenge. I think Antelope, adding a couple portables could give us an extra 100 or so, and it wouldn't be catastrophic, but some would be. So not to say some of them, portables or adding some facilities could help. Some would be a little trickier based on their scenarios.
Okay, thank you.
Just one more sort of management question. West Park manages its classrooms different than all of our other sites. If we were to adopt that classroom assignment management philosophy at our other sites, would that change the yellow, orange, red numbers?
Yes, that could. One of the challenges is both West Park and Antelope, to not the same level as West Park, were designed differently to have collaboration spaces for their teachers. So for instance, Wood Creek or Granite Bay, if you utilize the classrooms, all 4 periods, all the classrooms, where do the teachers go? So whereas West Park, we design specific spaces. So, but yes, to your point, if we figured out a way to manage that, then yes, it could potentially change.
But if the gain were significant enough, building collaboration spaces would be much smaller than building classrooms. So how would we look at that gain? How many student capacity would we gain versus how much it would cost us to provide collaboration space compared to making classroom space? So just another thing to think about.
Yeah, it's definitely, there's a 20%, I would say, and John and others could probably tell, you're never going to be 100%. There are certain classrooms that are tough to really share, but you can meet some.
We ended up doing that at Antelope because that was the board direction, was to have have a classroom be used all 4 class periods. So we did that at Antelope, but to do collaboration rooms, you have to take away a classroom for each department to create a collaboration room. And so that was a challenge, and now all of those have been turned into classrooms. So they're losing collaboration space because of that. And so the other schools, that was tried many, many years ago, but I think the other sites, one, it's going to be a huge cost to renovate those rooms, and then you lose classroom spaces to create a collaboration room. So it didn't pencil out, if I'm not mistaken, at the other sites, but Antelope did it, and that's why West Park got designed the way that it got designed, was to create that.
But building 4, say 6 portables to accommodate classrooms versus putting 2 in to accommodate collaboration space would be a net saving of 66%. So I think that's where the math versus just rearranging what we have. If we're going to add capacity, what type of capacity should we be at?
Yeah.
Where's the
It's
thing?
definitely good. It's just a logistical challenge. If you get your science teachers all in one area, like how would you make it so your science teachers collaborate if there's not a building next to them? So, but it's theoretically possible.
And just, I've had this saved for a while, and this is based on all the high schools in the state, based on enrollment this is from 2 years ago. But when you look at West Park getting up to 3,500, of the 1,600 high schools in the state of California, there's only 10 that are that big. And they're all in Southern California but 1. And so that's something to consider too. There's only 29 that are over 3,000 in the state of California. So that just shows you how big that is and how, and we already know West Park will double because they're barely at 2,000 now, and almost impossible to get around that campus.
And I bet we're the only one on residential streets and not an arterial roadway too, which is a whole other complicated factor.
Yeah, we had that same conversation based on a few of the schools that I'm aware of. Yeah, they're all on major streets, and yeah, that's the other downside to all of ours. Wood Creek had it when they were at 2,200, they were bursting at the seams to try to fit all those people in there. And so that becomes a challenge either way. And then even if we were to put people in portables, you still have the issue of how do you support Oakmont and Roseville sustaining their enrollment. Because that just means you're pulling kids from them. But we also have 2/3 of our student enrollment are west of Fittiman now, which is a whole other issue. We have all this land mass, but all the kids are on a smaller part of the city, so that's the challenge too, is they're all on one side. Well, Pete has 5 of them, so that's why. But
They're not your students anymore.
I just wanted to briefly do a time check. We're about almost 5:30, so we got about 30 minutes. And I think the one part on my end, I would like the board to try, next steps for me, for cabinet, as far as what you would like from us. You know, do you want a demographer? What, set up another study session, something like that. So I wanted to make sure you have plenty of time and just to get an idea about it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my gut instinct about it is that I feel like we're gonna have to remap a little bit. I mean, because I like the thinking outside the box, portables, and maybe that is still all part of the plan. But unless we can figure out a way to get more attendance at Oakmont, like we have to shift some of the population to the school that has more room. And whether that's moving up that whole purple and orange up a bit, or, shifting around something, or building a new school, maybe West Park satellite campus. So, I don't know.
We did have the discussion, I don't know, a few meetings ago about low-hanging fruit. And we picked the lowest hanging and made a couple little changes. And, I think we should at least entertain that discussion. Is there low-hanging fruit? And, when I look at this map, can you blow this map up a little, or are you stuck with this size?
The paper one is.
Right, that's actually fairly good here. When you look at, actually, can you slide it so I see less at Granite Bay and more of Wood Creek there? Oh, right there, that's good. So when we look at a map like this, I know I talked about it last time, but there's some things like we have, Baseline is a good arterial road, but we as a district didn't choose to put a boundary there. We put it on a smaller road that is to the south of it. If you look and you follow Baseline all the way to the right until where it meets Washington, you have a community that, and right above Oakmont, it's kind of hard since we can't really point at each other, but if I point here, I'm not tall enough to do it, but you have this area like go up, like right there, that funky little triangle there. You have areas like that are bound by, physical barriers, or arterial streets that, is there a way that if we made some changes to take that one area that looks like a little home plate there, and then over to Baseline, if all you did is take that slice and we moved that, what would that do to Roseville and Oakmont and Wood Creek? Would that balance the numbers? And if we did that, then would that give us opportunities for some other small tweaks in other areas to deal with it? And I think those are things that we could have discussions about. And that might be a stopgap measure, but it might not. And I think to do that, we need a demographer. And so that we can start having that. So I think before we set up a committee, we should identify what our overall goals are, and then maybe say, do we want to or not take a look at low-hanging fruit and have some basic demographer work done, to see, is it something where we can do another couple small tweaks? Or do we really need to do a wholesale change? And because I wasn't thinking along the lines you were, Tiffany, but listening to what you had to say, I think those are, I hate avoiding taking on a hard topic. But there is also sometimes a benefit to taking multiple bites. But you have to balance that with, do we want to keep having little disturbances in our district versus one disturbance that fixes it all? So maybe if we can talk a little bit about what our goals are. So what are we trying to fix? And I think Marla used that. What are we specifically trying to fix? If we could at least come to that conclusion today, and then decide, do we want to take a next step of sampling some demographic data to see how big of a problem it might be to get to those goals? And then if so, saying, okay, we're going to redistrict or reallocate, whatever we're calling this. We're going to move these lines. Then we need to have criteria for another group to help us do this. Or we just want to say, look, we're going to take this on, whatever the case may be. That may be an alternative that I could feel comfortable going forward with.
Just to chime in kind of what Pete was saying, that if the board is working on goals, criteria, stuff like that, I also can, we already have a demographer that helps with the other. I can work with cabinet and demographer to look at some potential low-hanging fruit. I know we talked about some that you brought up. I just didn't want to go ahead and put the cart before the horse until the board had that conversation. But that could be something I could explore in the near term, bring back to the board if there is any of those items that Pete suggested. We also have, this coming January, we'll have new numbers, and maybe it isn't. We're not able to, we need to do a really big committee. So those are just some of my thoughts after he's saying that I could start looking at some of those things. I mean, it's definitely helpful if I know the board, like I kind of already know some of the board's thinking, you're wanting to help out Oakmont and Roseville, or wanting to lessen the growth at West Park. But if there are other criteria and stuff, that's helpful too.
And I'm willing to throw out a couple of initial goals to get the conversation started. Like, I think it would be, I have kind of two top of mind goals. One is to make decisions that will ensure Oakmont High School has enough students to offer a full curriculum in high school experience to kids. And I think that we've gotten to some numbers where that has been difficult. I know we have the problem at Roseville, but that seems to be self-correcting as you look over time. The other big goal I would have is to try and come up with a scenario where when we look at this projection chart, the one that has the yellow, red, orange on there, that we could create a goal of getting out of the red to the greatest extent possible. Maybe there's not an answer for West Park, but maybe there's a way we can minimize it and mitigate it at the other schools. So, how do we do that? And if there's a way that we could, if I could see this chart, and I'd actually probably prefer to go to 2035, but if I could see this chart that went out for a comfortable amount of time where I could look at it and say, for the most part, a majority of our schools, a majority of the time are going to be no worse than yellow condition or orange condition, whatever we end up on. I think I could buy off on that as a board member, and I'd feel comfortable saying, we have a plan that is going to go 10 years. And in that 10 years, we'll have a better picture of what Roseville growth is going to look like, what annexations are going to happen or not happen, whether there's going to be specific plans for the far west area that's going to include a high school, and how might that happen? Is that going to be financed through an SFID, or is it going to be financed through developer fees? We still don't know any of that. So if we could do something that will solve the problem for an 8 to 10 year period, I could feel comfortable that we've done our job.
So I'm going to piggyback, I'm going to add a little bit to yours, Pete. What I also, and I think I would like, and maybe you already have this too, I mean, it's probably in two's realm, but do we have the bare minimum of number of offerings, how many CTE pathways, how many AP/IB/DE, what does the offering look like for a comprehensive high school, which is honoring to our community that we've not sacrificed their experience. And there might be a little bit of well, I really think that would be great if we had it, but what do we really need? Like, what's the bare minimum that we all agree is a successful comprehensive high school? And I don't know if that's...
I think that's great, but I also think what would help is what do we actually have now? Because I think we've all seen almost everything, but I'm not sure we all know what we have on every single campus.
Well, and that's probably, that will go hand in hand. And so then with that, how many students do we need? Because I think we also need to know, I think it'd be nice to have a orange, red warning sign. I mean, we're only showing the warning on we're maxing out, but where's the warning sign for we're losing so many programs, we're losing teachers, and now the community that was expecting to go to school X is like, I don't want to go here anymore. So I think we should be keeping an eye on that too.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. Like, I mean, others could agree or disagree. I would say Oakmont is like in that maybe orange realm right now, in that 1,200, we would like to be 1,400 plus, and Roseville maybe is yellow right now with that, doing fine where they're at, but it's just more keeping an eye, and we think it's going to resolve over time. That's a good point.
And so that would be good to be part of that discussion, I think also, and which then that would go hand in hand for, okay, then how are we going to move transfers? When now we're in orange, but it's still an open school to transfer out, and we stop it on one side. Anyway, those are the things I'd like to talk about too.
Yeah, we can certainly, in Ed Services, we can certainly bring the numbers for each school as according to each program, and give you additional data points as to what we have in our schools as according to the number of students enrolled in each program. And then we would also give you the completion rate. So the number of students that are actually completing said CTE pathway, to give you again additional information on an informed decision that you need to make going forward.
Okay. So that would be one of my goals. And I think that everyone, just again, if we're just talking about like what we want to see out of this is, okay, I'm going to stop with that, because I'm going to stop with that.
So earlier I was talking about how our interests were maybe a little bit different than 2006, different situations. But one thing I thought that does kind of align is when in this report they're talking about desired outcome was comprehensive school enrollments that do not exceed facility capacity and do not drop below a level necessary to maintain program equity, which are those align, right? We're dealing with an off balance of populations, but also want to ensure that our schools like Oakmont don't drop off and have a program lack of equity there. So I thought that was kind of interesting. That's a stay true kind of interest there.
One additional thought too, Pete, you touched on this earlier, and not that I distrust demographers, but the numbers will be off, and so I'm trying to factor that in too. Just as a recent example, this past Wednesday night, I was at the MAC meeting, which is the Municipal Advisory Board, for all of that new growth in unincorporated placer, and they're already making slight changes, like, oh, this area now is going to be high-density housing instead of whatever it was going to be. And so I'm already seeing the numbers are going to be off. Now that's area that's zoned for Oakmont though. And so that could help boost Oakmont's numbers, but how many other areas of town is that happening where it's high density now, but nobody really knows yet? And then we end up where every school is full, and then we need your portable idea. So it's kind of
And you're right on, because out in the West Park area, pretty much west of Fittyman, there's at least 6 that I know of, commercial properties that have been converted to residential properties by the city. And I'm not sure we're fully aware of all those.
Correct.
So that's another area we have to look, because our worst case scenario may not be our worst case scenario.
right.
And then we have the issues with the state that, our wonderful state of California will incentivize different land uses than the cities allow and override the cities. And almost all of those have been in lieu of higher density rather than lower density. So those, whether that's good or not, policy is one thing, but the impact on us changes our numbers drastically.
Right. Yeah, I just want to be thoughtful about it and not change Oakmont's boundaries, and then we find out, oh, well, now Oakmont's going to be over full because of all this growth out that way. And, you know, it's just impossible to make a perfect decision. I'm going to bring this map with me to work tomorrow and hash it out in the office.
Perfectly imperfect decision.
Right.
I'll just add, I really appreciate, just along the same lines I wrote down, along with Pete, I liked your idea of getting out of the red, being okay with a plan to go to 10 years. I really liked Marla and Bill, how you brought up, and I had highlighted that in the initial report, to not exceed facility capacity and do not drop below a level necessary to maintain program equity. And for me, I go back to my long-term goal for this whole process is that we have a long-term plan that's community-based schools that maintains program equity and is using our facilities to the best of their ability. That would be kind of my guidelines.
And I think you're saying community-based, and I agree with that in the sense of, I know Brandon said, you know, even though you didn't go to junior high with any of his kids, you're gonna be fine. You know, I think, okay, to me, community-based is doing our very best to make sure that the junior high, I don't know what the junior high boundaries are, but honoring some of the junior high boundaries, if we can keep that together. And so the low-hanging fruit is you're talking about that, and I think that looks like low-hanging fruit, but I have no idea what the junior high boundaries are, and what are we doing there?
I actually don't agree with honoring junior high boundaries at all, because I'll tell you, when they make their decisions, they don't consider our high schools at all. And our elementary school districts already split up junior high, their attendance boundaries. They split up their elementary school to their high schools, to the middle schools, and they've set up their middle schools very specifically to not go to our same high schools. So if we would try to be matching an ideal that they have never set or even tried to set. And I will tell you, just based on my own experience of me going from middle school to high school, my kids moving complete communities from middle school to high school, if there's any time you want to make a change, that's the perfect time for kids to change. And so,
and I guess, so I've lived in the bubble of the Eureka district, which my kids from K through 8, all the same, there's no varying of boundaries for those kids, and there's only one school, Green Hills, which at the end of 3rd grade, they have to make the choice, and that's it. So I guess I'm just living in this perfect bubble, and I think, how can we possibly do that to anyone else?
And let me clarify, community-based to me is less about the junior high, the middle school boundaries. It would be nice, my kids went to Cooley and those kids go to 3 different high schools. So our life has been that way. And so that, it's not that so much as me, it would be nice, but to me it's more similar to the thing that I voted against for different reasons, but moving Oakmont Island in with the community that it's connected to. So contiguous, is that the right word that I'm looking for? So just trying to the best that we can, I'm just saying, try to keep school communities connected to each other. That's what I mean more by, I think, community-based.
I guess I live in a bubble, and
It's a nice bubble that you worked in.
everyone.
That is a nice one.
when I think of community, I think of the physical neighborhood community versus elementary or even middle school communities, because not just Cooley, but Chilton and Bolshoi get split to at least 2, in most cases 3 different high schools. And so we have to be careful if we set an expectation in one part of our district why we're not doing it across the, now, we could do that, but we'd have to wipe this map out. We'd literally have to start with a blank map, which has some great advantages, but as Bill pointed out, it has some big disadvantages as well.
Well, maybe it just comes down to when, again, people are buying a house, and there's an expectation, they look at their schools, and they just say, okay, this is where I'm going. And I guess obviously in West Roseville, there's a mix-up, and people know that. Maybe that's the difference.
Actually, most of them don't. It's a huge surprise to them.
They should know that when they buy their house.
The other thing, I like what we've talked about in terms of making sure that, and this would be a non-negotiable to me, connected to that community-based, is we don't overlap the major roadways. Pete, you had talked about that, and we discussed that before. Being really clear to me, that's another community-based, like, let's be thoughtful about some of these major roadways and where we're making that cut, that boundary. So that also connects back to community-based for me.
Yeah, I think the demographer will naturally do that. I was one of those kids where I went to 3 high schools before I graduated. I lived in Stockton and was bused to Tokay High School in Lodi. So when I think of community school, I think of it, I guess, proximity. Like, I don't love at all that, you know, the Roseville, we had to make it go all the way up there. Because if you're a student trying to play a sport or go to after-school activities or go to theater at night, I mean, that's a trek across town. I mean, and I recognize that we're in that dilemma. We can't really change it, but if we're looking at the big picture, you know, and is there a way to offer transportation later or do different things to be able to get kids to their school all throughout the week at night?
That's a big issue. I had 4 kids in high school at the same time, traveling 45 minutes to Oakmont every day, and they all had different schedules. So sometimes it was 4 trips to Oakmont. Well, they all went at the same time, but 4 trips picking them up. So in a day, 5 trips, which at about 25 miles a round trip, it's a lot of time and money and expense for people. So it is something I think we have to consider.
Yeah, no, that's why I thought, I mean, I think we all mostly agree, but I put the transportation and student safety, balancing enrollment to shifting populations, having equal programs at all schools. Like, I feel like we're mostly, I mean, is anyone feeling vastly different than that, or we're missing anything? What else do you need from us, Joe?
I feel like maybe what we should do is one sentence define the goal, and then you're asking, and then we're saying, okay, with this basic goal in mind, does Joe need to get a demographer? Do we need to flesh out some of these other low-hanging fruit? I mean, this is the big picture, do these other little steps, and then we come back together.
And I feel like we do need to get a demographer, and then whether it doesn't mean we're for sure going to do something with that, but at least to get more information, what are our options, and maybe we meet with the demographer and decide, no, we're not ready to do that yet, or we can do this instead, but I don't know.
Yeah,
Thoughts?
I 100% agree, and I think the demographer will inform us regardless. I mean, that information will be helpful whether or not we decide to go forward. It may help identify some of that lower hanging fruit or other measures short of actually calling a full committee and going through that process. So I think everyone said we need more info in different areas. So, but do we still need like an overarching goal, or
I think we're still
at this
gathering.
point we're still gathering, right?
Yeah, like
I think we need some broad goals, and I think the statement you read, Bill, is, I think that what they said back then echoes parts of what I said, parts of what Tiffany said, parts of what every one of us said. So I think that as a basic 2-pronged goal, facilities and capacity. You know, equity, being able to offer on the low end and not going over capacity on the high end. You know, how do we address that? And then I don't know if there's any others that we think we need to set a goal to get to that next step.
I think maybe a time that we're saying that it needs to be long-term. We're not looking, so that's a big goal, is we're looking to make some decisions that will last for quite a number of years.
And my thing was, I'd like to see us getting out to 2035, a 10-year period. I think our projections need to be at least there so that we can feel confident that we're not shirking our responsibility.
Agreed.
So I personally would be interested in getting more. I like that, I'm not really familiar with demographers, but it sounds like those of you who are think that that's a really good idea, so that's fine with me. I'm interested in, yeah, exploring some of these other areas to see if, as Bill said, if we need to, if those handle our goal, or if we need to do more. So for me, I guess a demographer would help do that, and
What are we specifically asking this demographer to do? Does Joe know that?
No, I mean, and that's where I currently work with a demographer each year. And so if it's something fairly simple that I understand, I can just work with the demographer and come back. And now if it's getting in a pretty complex manner, we're talking about committees, then we want the demographer to work more closely with the board.
So are we asking the demographer to find the low-hanging fruit? I guess that's what I'm getting at. So
could you just work with the demographer that we have in terms of, like we said, some of these small boundary adjustments along major
Yes,
roadways?
I could do that with
and-
small stuff. It's if the board wants to go further towards committee, that's where we would, the
It sounds like we're not prepared enough to go there based on what I've heard. But do you feel that from what you've heard from us, that you have a sense of the overarching goals and you'd be able to have some initial discussions with the demographer to help inform our next discussion? I think it really comes down to that.
Yeah, I feel like I've got a pretty good sense. I mean, and that I could come back and the board could tell, if I'm way off, you could be like, Joe, you're off and we need to give more clear goals. But I think it does seem to be pretty aligned. I don't feel like Pete and Bill are saying anything drastically different. It feels like everybody's pretty aligned, and I feel like I got a pretty good handle on the direction the board wants to go. So I think I can at least start these initial conversations with the demographer and explore some low-hanging fruit. Maybe I'll come back and say there's not really much, or maybe I come back with here's a couple ideas, and we would then have to look to see does it meet long-term needs or not, and then go from there.
And if you feel like there's more work that could be done along the facilities route as well, that would fulfill that with portables or...
Yeah, I definitely know that there are options
And just
there.
maybe give us what those projections would be if that was included.
Yeah, sure.
And I think we also need to make sure we're addressing the West Park Challenge.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure what that looked at, and I know,
And I think some of that's going to be having those discussions with Roseville and the county to fully understand. But I do think maybe the other thing we need is what Marla brought up, and that is, she brought up part and then I sort of filled it in. What do we really have at each of the sites? I think it would be very helpful for us to have a page or matrix with each school, and these are the programs. I mean, we all know that there's culinary at 2 schools. We all know that there's IB at 2 schools, but I don't think we've ever had it all in one place at one time. And I think it's really important for us to know, because we are going, no matter what we say we want to do, we can say we don't want any transfers at all, but it's going to be very hard for us to have a health academy and tell kids that are interested in the health academy that they can't go to the health academy that we've invested gazillions of dollars in. So I think we have to have that to fully inform our decision making so that we're prepared to make whatever decisions that may be. And then we can look at it and say, whoa, I didn't even realize that we have a deficit in this school. Or heck, why is there such a disparity? Or, oh wow, look, they're all the same. Because I don't think we've ever looked at that. You guys know that. I don't know if we know that.
Okay.
And I'm gonna come up with another word for low hanging fruit too, because I said that because I didn't have a better thing to say, but we're dealing with, people's, where they live, and I think I try and find something a little more respectful that has the same message.
Yeah, and that would be?
I don't know, I'll have to Google it.
Okay, So then, do we need a motion to adjourn? Are we good to adjourn?
I think we do need a motion to adjourn. but-
Okay.
I'll move we quit.
All right. Pete wants to quit.
I'll second.
Second. Okay, we have a motion and a second to adjourn. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Nay. Okay, we will reconvene in 4 minutes.
Thanks a lot, Joe.
Yes, thank you,
You
Joe.
guys did need to move out.
No, this was
Got nowhere.
a good amount. Yeah, another